Introduction. Falling in Love. My name is Elena, and this is the story of the love that changed me forever. A love so beautiful, so fleeting, that even in its sorrow, it remained the most precious thing I have ever known. I never expected my life to shift on an ordinary autumn afternoon. That day in our town's small library, I first saw Adrian. He sat by the window, lost in thought, his messy black hair falling over his forehead. He had the kind of presence that made the world around him quieter. I was reaching for a book on the top shelf when he silently picked it up and handed it to me with a small smile. That simple act sparked a conversation that stretched until the sun dipped below the horizon. After that day, I kept finding him in the library. Our brief encounters turned into long walks through the city streets. Adrian was a mystery. His words, his silences, the way he looked at the world as if every moment was sacred. He loved poetry, and every time he spoke, it felt like he was trying to capture the fleeting beauty of life. I, who had always planned for the future, found myself drawn to his way of embracing the present. One evening, as the autumn rain drizzled around us, he took my hand and whispered, "Life is too short not to love." That was the moment I knew I had fallen for him. Our days became filled with laughter, whispered confessions, and endless conversations under the stars. My world had never been so alive, but every time I spoke of the future, he hesitated. He avoided making promises, as if he feared tomorrow. At first I ignored it, afraid to break the spell we had woven. I convinced myself it was just his way of living in the moment. Then, one night, as I reached for his hand, he flinched. It was slight, almost unnoticeable, but I felt it. My heart tightened, and for the first time, fear crept in. 2. Rising conflict, the revelation. Weeks passed, and I began noticing the changes. Adrian was getting weaker. His skin had lost its glow, his voice sometimes trembled, and the deep, dry coughs came more often. Every time I asked, he brushed it off with a joke or changed the subject. But the truth was right in front of me, waiting to be uncovered. One evening, I visited his apartment unexpectedly. As I stepped inside, my eyes landed on the bottles of medicine scattered on his desk. My hands trembled as I picked one up, reading the label. I could barely breathe. When he entered the room and saw my expression, his face changed. He let out a sigh and sat down. "I knew you'd find out eventually," he said softly. Then he told me everything. He had been diagnosed with cancer months ago, an aggressive kind, one that left him with little time. The doctors had given him a number, a countdown to the end. I felt as if the world had been ripped from beneath my feet. "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked. "Why did you let me fall in love with you if you knew you were leaving?" A sad smile touched his lips. "Because I wanted to live, even if just for a little while. I didn't want to be just a dying man. I wanted to be someone who loved and was loved." Tears burned my cheeks, and my heart screamed at me to run, to escape the pain before it consumed me. But as I looked at him, at his tired eyes, at the love that still shone within them, I knew I couldn't leave. I took his trembling hands in mine and whispered, "Then let me love you until the very end." 3. The peak of love and pain. From that night on, every moment with Adrian became precious. We lived as if time had no power over us. We traveled to the places he had always wanted to see. sat by the ocean as the waves whispered our names, and walked through forests where the trees held our secrets. He no longer hid his illness from me. Some days he was strong enough to laugh, to tease me about my terrible cooking. Other days he barely had the strength to get out of bed. But I stayed. I read to him, held his hand through the pain, and reminded him that he was not alone. Our love became something deeper, quieter but unbreakable. The passion of the early days turned into something even more profound. Even in his suffering, he found ways to make me smile. Even in my sorrow, I found ways to hold him closer. One evening, as we lay on the rooftop, staring at the stars, he whispered, "You made death less terrifying for me." His words shattered me, but I held back my tears and kissed his forehead. That night, I prayed for time to stop. But time is cruel, the heartbreaking goodbye. The night he left, the world stood still. He had been getting worse, each breath a struggle. I sat by his bed, holding his fragile hands, whispering stories of the future he wouldn't see. "You promised to stay," I choked out, even though I knew he couldn't keep that promise. His lips curved into a faint smile. "I am here," he whispered. "Always." His fingers tightened around mine for a final time before his grip loosened. His breaths faded into silence. The warmth in his skin turned cold. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, holding on to him as if I could somehow bring him back. Outside, the sky burned in shades of orange and pink. It was a beautiful sunset, our last one together. Adrian was gone. But the love we had shared, that would never leave me. Months passed, but the world still felt empty without him. Yet I found pieces of him everywhere. In the pages of poetry books, in the way the wind whispered through the trees, in the warmth of the sun against my skin. He had become a part of me. I visited the library again, tracing my fingers over the shelves where we first met. The book he had once handed me was still there. I pulled it out, holding it close to my chest. At night, I lay under the same stars we once watched together, and I smiled through my tears, knowing that somewhere, in another world, in another life, he was waiting for me. And when my time came, I knew I would find him again.